Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the International Employment and Skills Forum, where I'm joined by a number of industry experts who will be participating in a really engaging conversation about this particular space as we are. My name is Gamu Matarira. I'm the founder and CEO of Gen A Consultancy based in the southwest of England. And I basically help SMEs in the UK and internationally to expand internationally into Africa through strategic partnerships, but also working with business leaders in Africa with their local initiatives and just building stronger UK-African links. I'm joined today by Jane, Joanna, Vanessa, Steve, Jonathan, and I will hand over and allow each of you to introduce yourselves one at a time. So just going from my left-hand side, Jane, would you like to go first?
No problem. Thanks a lot, Gamu. My name is Jane Bailey. I'm from Reward Risk Management Limited, and we help organisations understand what their salaries and terms and benefits should look like in terms of the people that they're employing, both in the UK and internationally. So we help them to understand what it is they need to do to get the right people, keep the right people, and engage with them. And that's generally as much as we do, but all across the world.
Brilliant. Thanks for joining us, Jane. Joanna?
Hello, so I'm Joanna. My business is Limitless Peak Performance. The name made a lot of sense years ago, not so much now. I help small businesses with the people part of growth. So who are they going to hire? Where are they going to get them from? How are they going to get hold of them? How are they going to keep them? How are they going to keep them motivated? And how are they going to keep them productive and so they don't leave again?
Fantastic. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you.
Vanessa, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Landreneau. I have a company called Hummingbird Consulting, and we, like Jane, also focus on employee reward. We look very much at putting structures in place to give you a very open and transparent reward framework, so grading structures, career paths. Then we do some work benchmarking so you can understand where your pay is against the market, and then work with you to design incentive plans and a reward package that helps you attract and retain the people that you want in your business. And again, that's international.
Fantastic. Welcome, Vanessa. Hi, Steve.
Hi. Yes. So my name's Steve Middleton. I work for Engagement Multiplier. So we're the data. We work with thousands of clients all over the world. And our data helps you or helps our clients to unlock the truth. You know, what's really going on inside their business? How do their people really feel about the way the business is being run? But importantly, help you understand and get clarity on, as business leaders, where we need to focus to drive all the things that Vanessa, Johanna and Jane, and I'm sure Jonathan and Gamu are going to talk about today. So yeah, exciting. Nice to be with you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. Looking forward to hearing your insights. And last but not least, Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Edge. I'm the Group HR Director for a company called Quintessential Brands. We're a distilling company, as you will see over my left shoulder, some of our products. You probably won't have heard of the organisation, but hopefully you'd have heard of lots of our brands. So the ones from the UK would be largely Green Oars Gin, Opia Gin, Bloom Gin. We make a lot of vodkas, whiskies, and all sorts around the world. We distribute them in multiple markets. So no, thanks for the invite. Great to be here.
Brilliant. Great to have you with us. Okay, so just to set the scene a little, so understanding that businesses across the globe face similar issues and looking at how different countries think about employment and skills is important as we examine the sectors that we are working with. So in a globally connected age, we look beyond national boundaries for businesses to fill skills gap and for candidates to build careers. Brexit in the UK and international political thinking is constantly changing the employment landscape for both employers and candidates. So our International Employment Forum thinks about opportunities for businesses and job seekers amidst the double disruptions of the economic effects of the pandemic, as well as the increasing automation that's transforming jobs. So the first question I'd like to throw out at the panel, what do you perceive as the main barriers to employment for job seekers in today's world of work? Joanna, would you like to kickstart that one for us?
Well, I guess from what I see from some of the work that I do with small business leaders is there feels like there's a disconnect between what their employer thinks is a decent job or a decent skill set or a decent person and what the individuals feel. So I'm seeing lots of flexible working, when I work, how I work, who I work for, how often I work. And the mental model, if you like, that employers have, which is, well, you work for me full time and you work in the office. So I think the biggest barrier is this disconnect between what I'm looking for and what I think is available to me. And the sort of disappointment that sits around that, where, you know, you've got employees looking for something which doesn't exist and employers feeling like they're looking for something which doesn't exist as well.
Great. Jane, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's also a disconnect between employees' expectations when they come into the employment market about what they've been taught they will need to bring to the market and what they actually need to do. And so there's this whole focus on IT skills and things like that, but actually there's not enough focus on the other skills that people need to have in order to undertake a job, and not just in the IT, but in all of the sectors. And so because it's going to look at sexy sectors, the ones that are going to be high tech, high skill, whatever, and are not taught about the other sectors that might be as important and where they may end up working. So I think there's also that disconnect with younger people not really understanding what they're coming into.
Absolutely. Steve, what's your thoughts on that one?
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, like I said, I tend to be the data man. So when we're looking at attracting talent, we tend to look at it through simple as ABC. It's about alignment, belonging, and clarity. And when I talk about alignment, and I think this, you know, a lot of the younger generation are looking for purpose-driven organizations. So you want to make sure that when they join an organization that you have a clear vision, you have values that people can connect to, and purpose within the business. Because if those three things are right, then you have individuals that are not only excited to be part of your organization, but it gives them that greater sense of belonging. There's a value for what you're delivering as a business. And that's and in a world where we're seeing a salary spiral, because we know it's a competitive market out there, there are certain things we can be doing as business leaders to attract that talent to us, which is over and above just a higher wage. Because if they're going for a higher wage, there's always going to be the next move, which, again, if you're on about, it's not just about attracting them, it's about retaining them, give them that greater reason for why, you know, the environment that you're inviting them into, particularly in the SME world, but also very much so in the kind of that small to medium sized corporate worlds as well.
I agree with that. Absolutely. Jonathan, from the perspective of the industry that you represent, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I could probably talk for half an hour on this, actually, and so please stop me if I'm going on too much. I think it's some really good points being made by others before me, which has helped me to put my thoughts in place. I think that when you're recruiting, having spent this morning interviewing people, it's definitely a sales environment in terms of you're trying to sell the company. And there's such pressure to land people that it's very easy to give a unrealistic version of what the company looks like, and then that gap between, you know, what the candidate expected versus reality can be the undoing of us. And certainly we've had that beforehand. However, you know, we all do work on our EVP to make sure that we look good, all the adverts are coming in from there as well. One thing that really strikes me is often, like, my team will recruit people into the business, and it's so important that the line manager has got the right capabilities, that the line manager is aligned with what the organization is trying to get to and trying to do as well. And often we find, I'm sure Steve, you'll echo this as well, from an engagement perspective, you know, engagement is so driven by the line manager rather than the organization. So, yeah, we can do a fantastic job of attracting people in. We can be very honest about what people are going to come into. But if they land with the line manager that gets it and works with them, then that can be a great employment experience. Or if they don't, then you can get into the piece which is they're lucky to have a job, you know, which doesn't help us at the moment. And bit where we can find is people have real choice. So whilst they might be lucky to have a job, there's plenty of other lucky employers out there that are quite happy to employ them at the same time as well.
Absolutely. I see it. Go ahead. Oops, Steve, you've...
Yeah, moved around. Sorry.
Oh, you've moved around, right.
I was going to say, I think what you just raised there, Jonathan, is a really important point. one of the things that our technology measures is leadership, because whether we like it or not, and I talk about the world of engagement, we're engagement multipliers, that's what we're about, but engagement is a huge attraction and retention tool. So if you are, poor leadership will drive poor performance, inspirational leadership will drive inspirational performance. So whether we like it or not, as business leaders, we have a responsibility. So it's really important, and Jonathan, I think you've absolutely got it right. It's really important to make sure we've got the right people. There's a difference between a manager and a leader. We've got the right people in a position to enable our employees to thrive in their roles, which is why as businesses we need to make sure that we have the right people, because particularly in this current climate with remote working and all the other challenges that are around there, it's leadership's changing. So we need to make sure we're keeping our fingers on the pulse.
Come back to you, Joanna, in a second. Vanessa, thanks for waiting patiently. What are your thoughts?
Just picking up on a couple of the points around an understanding of reality around line managers and leadership. I think one of the things that feels to be missing in some of the places that I've worked with is that ability of line managers to help employees understand the reality of a business, because it's absolutely essential that your business has values, and we need a value proposition that brings people into it. But at the same time, the business won't exist if it doesn't make money. And there is also that dirty message that a line manager has to be able to give that says there is a balance to be struck here, and we want you to pursue your career. We have important values to us, but at the same time there is a commercial reality, and I'm not sure that a lot of people quite understand that. It's a business, it can do anything limitlessly. No, it can't. There are constraints, and a line manager who can share that context is invaluable.
Great point. Thank you for that, Vanessa. Joanna, do you want to step in here?
Well, it's a build, to be honest with you. So I had a choice of a couple of things to say here, one of which was horrible leadership and values mismatch was the other reason why I think there might be barriers to entry. And interestingly, one of the things I observe as a leadership coach is we're inviting line managers to be much more self-aware than I see them being in reality, which is, do I understand what the values of the organization are? Do I understand how I live and breathe and embody those values of the organization? Do I understand how they're received? Because there can be a mismatch between intent and execution. So for me, we're inviting, or we're anticipating, I think, a whole bunch of self-awareness, but in my experience doesn't exist. So one of the reasons why I wanted to come on this panel is to draw that direct line of sight between understanding our leadership style and the skills challenge, because I'm not sure I ever hear skills challenge and leadership style or leadership expressed in the same conversations, or not often enough in my view.
Great point. Any other comments on that? Actually, that's really interesting, Joanna.
I will.
Go on, Jane.
I think, from my perspective, and I think Joanna and Jonathan both will agree with me in this case, that when you have that skills gap and that the leaders don't understand the impacts that they have and that they're not selling the business in the right way, the answer always becomes it's pay. And then individuals who are looking for jobs focus on pay, because the more pay I get, the more value I am. And actually, you've got to balance that out between, actually, are you worth what you're asking, which is a difficult one to have in the current employment thing, and versus, are they worth what we need? And if they come in, what are we going to give them? Because it's the whole disconnect is huge. And an electrician, a man running an engineering company said to me the other day, I need an electrician. The guy's just told me he wants to be paid 50 grand a year. Whoever paid an electrician 50 grand a year? And but then when I was talking to him, he was also, well, I haven't got time for all this management stuff. I just want to get the guy in. Okay.
Yeah. Fascinating. Go ahead, Steve.
I think, and again, there's so many ways we could go with this, but and it comes back down to, again, what you've got there, Jane, is an example of hire fast, right? And it's never a smart decision to do that, because you're looking to fill gaps, and when you hire fast, you normally see there's a ripple effect of that, and it means you're losing fast as well, and you're in this vicious spiral of it just going round. So you know, and having real purpose behind why you're hiring people. And you know, we do something. So a couple of things I want to mention. So first of all, we've just done a white paper that you can all have access to. And again, Gami, maybe I can share it with you so you can share it amongst the people that are here today. We did something called on the stay factors. What was quite interesting about this, because obviously we're in this climate where the Great Resignation, I'm sure we've all heard of it, and we prefer to call it the Great Retention. So what opportunity we got to actually retain the talent we have? And so we looked at, well, what are those important stay factors? One of those, and only one of those, was relevant to pay. And that's just about make sure you're paying fairly for what they do. It's not about paying over the odds, it's about making pay. And we believe that, you know, you should pay fairly for what you're doing. The other 9 factors cost almost nothing. It was systems, time, structures, processes. And then when we looked at the reasons for why people are leaving, there's 2 major reasons that we were seeing, you know, looking at, well, first of all, they don't feel valued by the person they report into. Now, whether that's the boss or the manager or their team lead. So, you know, I even read a stat the other day, which was, it's funny, but it's not, you know, 7 out of 10 employees would rather see their boss get fired than get a pay rise. Well, actually, that's quite sad. I mean, imagine being that in one of those 7 individuals. You know, it's not funny. But the second piece comes back to this sense of belonging. You know, whether we like it or not, the world's changed over the last 2 to 3 years. The way that people look at work, their environment, their families, what they want out of it. I'm one of those. You know, where the journey I was on in February 2020 is very different to the path and the journey I'm on here in May 2022. So I'm sure there are others that feel the same. So we just want to make sure that, again, we have that sense of belonging, we feel part of something, and that matches, you know, our desire, and particularly with the top talent, because that's the talent that you don't want to lose, but also the talent you want to attract in. So what's important to them, and you'll probably find that money is pretty low on the priority.
Great, thanks for that. And that's a really nice segue into our next question, which is there too much reliance on the international workforce? You know, thinking about the pandemic and how it's changed the world of work and how it's opened up, you know, our sort of boundaries in terms of where we're employing from. And is there not enough focus on filling jobs locally? Vanessa, what do you think?
I would probably change the question slightly. I work near Cambridge. I work in a tech ecosystem, biotech, high tech. We hire internationally constantly, and people can work internationally. I would turn it on its head to say it's not so much about too much reliance on the international workforce and not focusing on filling jobs locally. It's about focusing on not developing talent locally. It's expedient to hire an engineer who's up to speed in another country rather than taking on a couple of graduates in this country and teaching them. And so I think that's where I would say that I would focus is it's on that expedient lack of development of local talent.
Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, we do some of the development stuff as well, but it often outstrips or is outstripped by our retention issues. And we were hurt massively by Brexit in terms of lots of our, it's a horrible phrase, but our blue collar kind of workers returned back to their home countries and left us in a situation whereby it then became our only piece was to recruit locally. And we found that they were less willing and wanted higher pay, which obviously has a flow through into your product cost as well from there. We experimented with some workers from Hong Kong with the I forget what it was called, but the exchange program that could happen. That was okay. They were highly skilled, but not necessarily keepers from that side of things. So we were a stepping stone for them. You know, our biggest problem is and I get, Steve, your point, you know, hiring fast, etc., and not taking, there is a balance between getting the right person and getting a person in. Back to your point, Joanna, earlier on about the mismatch of values and leadership, trying to hire leaders in with the right value set is really difficult as well, which, to your point, Vanessa, is growing those leaders internally who are more akin to your value set is where we need to be. We have a turnover rate of about 15%. We're often looking for kind of 20 plus positions at the same time. and almost all of that would be recruiting in the UK. And completely agnostic as to, as long as the person has the right to work in the UK, then we're very interested in seeing them from that. But trying to grow your own talent is fantastic. Trying to keep hold of those talented people when they can earn more money elsewhere becomes problematic as well, and you do get into that kind of game of pay, particularly in the lower paying elements where they're leaving for £1.50 an hour more or something like that as well.
Absolutely. Joanna, do you want to step in here?
Well, it's a build on both Vanessa and Jonathan's points, really. So one of the things I observe as a performance coach is 80% of our performance is down to our mindset, not our knowledge and skills. But what I notice is that our recruitment process is still focused on knowledge and skills, and they use an experience as almost like the expedient for testing that knowledge and skills. And so it's then back to Vanessa's point about, if I get a ready-made product, I can deploy it in hands off, thanks a mil, which for me is not useful because it doesn't build that engagement. It makes the person feel a bit abandoned and left alone. And actually, the most important bit is the values fit. You can teach knowledge and skills, that's dead easy. The attitudinal fit, the values fit is much harder. So what I'm looking for is the recruitment process to be much more about the values fit and the attitude of an individual, and less about the knowledge and skills, because that can be retrofitted afterwards. And the key thing that I observe, and it's not like I'm on a mission to bash leaders, but I sense sometimes when we're lazy, I just want it done, please. I want it to come in. It's a bit of abdication. I want it in, I want it done, I want to move on to the next thing on my list of things to do. And for me, that's about reprioritizing. What is our role as a leader? It's to facilitate excellence in others.
Absolutely. Jane,
yeah.
Go ahead. Fantastic.
I think there's a side issue to that as well, and that is about our expectation that when we train people up, they're going to stay with us. And I used to always be experiencing this. We're not going to spend money training people up and then let them leave. And it was like, well, if you do that, if you actually step back and say, we're going to give you superb training, then you could go off. It's the Virgin approach, isn't it? Go off, learn somewhere else, and then come back, bring with you that learning, and you get such that there's a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, an engagement in that in itself, is that by empowering me to go away with my learning and do more, you're empowering me to choose to come back again.
Yeah.
And I think we lose sight of that as well in our employment, and leaders recognize the need to do that. Yeah. And quite often what we find is that the managers just simply can't accept it as a concept, that they're going to have to let them go once they've taught them.
Can I just make a quick comment before I get Steve to add to this? So that's a very valid point about businesses allowing employees to sort of go off, get more experience. I've had 2 of those experiences, but when I think about the type of organization it was, these were multinational, quite large organizations that do realize, I suppose, that maybe it's the different type of the way they work, the size of the business in terms of all the learning they are kind of aware of that they need to get under their belts. So what is the quickest way to do that? Well, actually, it makes sense as part of our strategy to encourage people to go off and, tell us what they learned in Oracle and bring it back in and things like that. It's actually a very smart way of doing things. But maybe this is some of the thinking we need to be sort of imparting in the smaller businesses as well. Steve, do come in.
And I've got, so again, it's a build on everything you guys have said, really, but hopefully not repeating too much. First of all, an example on what you were just saying there. I remember, Gamu, my favourite hotel, or my favourite restaurant in the world is, and if you haven't been there, you should definitely go. It's Raymond Blanc's hotel restaurant in Oxford. It's called Le Manoirs. It's just an amazing, amazing place, great experience. And I remember he took me to the kitchens, and he was talking about the fact that his team are world renowned. He trains people up so well that people are going to come and poach his team. But he does it. He says, I want to make sure that everybody that leaves my hotel, my restaurant, they are more skilled, they're more valuable than they were the day they joined. And the reason why he does that is 2 reasons. One, he knows they'll come back. After they go and do their piece around the world and they're doing their different things in these lovely, they'll come back. But also, Raymond never has to, he has no problem getting staff. He's got such a high reputation for the upskilling of his team and for the way he treats his team. Yes, he's a hard worker, and he makes you work hard, and it's long hours. And by the way, long hours, poor pay, right? But at the same time, the fulfillment of that job is so much that people don't want to leave. And the reason why they do leave is because it's an experience, but they know that he's got a good opportunity to get them back. So that's the first thing. Johanna, and I'm going to steal this from you. I loved what you said about leadership, to instill excellence in others. There is this great misconception that leaders feel they have to have all the answers. Your role is really to inspire others, to enable them to your team are doing the job on a daily basis. They understand the challenges and you've probably got the solutions, but have you got the confidence or the ability to come forward with those solutions? Well, that's the job of your leader. And if not, to do it in conversation, to find other ways to do that. And then coming back to your point, Jonathan, and sorry, there's so much, but I get frustrated that people are often looking for what we call the magic bullet. Let's hire the skill in because they're just going to fix a problem we have. And going back to everybody's point, I would take mindset and values all day long over skill, because you can teach skill. You can give them what they need to thrive in their roles as long as they've got the right mindset and the values. And it comes back to my point around, and I think there's a balance that we can play. Now, there will be immediate positions that we need to fill. So we need to buy that skill in, okay? And that means we do need to hire fast and we need to get that skill in. And there might be certain skills that we need, which isn't something that needs to be qualified in. So I understand that. So let's buy that in. But also there's a balance where we can upskill. And that's where the local talent pool comes from. And that's something that we always, because again, we're a global business, so we're hiring from all over the place, but we always try and make sure that we're building local skills as well. So who can we hire locally? Because by the way, because they haven't got the skills yet, they're cheaper, right? If we talk about a business, Vanessa, that needs to be profitable, our biggest expense is our people often. So upskilling is going to take investment. As long as you do the upskilling, don't just hire them and expect them to be able to do the job because you've got them cheap, because that's what happens. And Joanna, you obviously relate to that. You have to be willing to have a program, a system, a structure, a framework in place to make sure that when they join you, that they are actually going to get there. And actually, because they've got the right values and the right mindset, you'll be surprised how quickly they get there. And then what you have is a fully skilled employee, absolutely smashing it, loving the business you're working for. Everybody's a winner and they're costing you less.
Joanna, what would you like to say to that?
Two things. So the first one is, I want to ask a mischievous question. Do we have a skills gap or a mindset gap? Not necessarily to be answered now. The second thing is, I think some businesses are less lateral in their thinking when it comes to sourcing strategies. So you will have heard this, no doubt, but the 7 Bs of sourcing: build, buy, borrow, boost, bounce, bind, bot is the last one as well. So I think often when I speak to businesses, they go mental model, I hire, I grow, they stay with me, they retire. And actually what I try and do is go, actually, can you buy somebody in for a bit? Is it a consultant? Can the consultant do the job and then roll off? That may be more of a contractor. Or can they come in and build you a capability by providing training to some other folks that you want to upskill, for example? And I think sometimes, certainly with the smaller businesses, their mental models are in only one of those 7 sourcing strategies. So one of the other things I'm trying to encourage is that lateral thought about how could you build this capability and move away from the build? What else could you do?
Brilliant. Any other comments on that before we move on? This is really interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan. Go on.
Just one thing, and
yeah,
sort of coming at it from an operational side of things. Mindset, I absolutely get. I agree with everything everyone's been said. It is sometimes, I used to have a manager who a long time ago at Nestle used to say, and I won't repeat exactly what he said, when you're up to your backside in alligators, it's very difficult to kind of think rationally. And I think there's always a balance in businesses, which is, I would love to grow our internal talent. I would love to completely take mindset over capabilities. I would love to do all of that. But there's a reality, which is, to your point, Vanessa, at the very beginning, we have to make enough cash to survive next year to be able to do all of that. So there is a balance. Joanne, I've never heard that 7 Bs. I couldn't repeat them, you said them so quickly, but it was interesting. But yeah, we get locked into that buy, which is we're out, we're recruiting, let's go and buy some talent. And I think there's more of a blend, which is we ask a lot from leaders. We probably ask too much from leaders. We ask them to be great managers, great leaders, great administrators, and we're constantly kind of putting more and more on. And I think from HR and finance we do that as well. finance or HR shared services, I'm not sure services, but self-service. All of a sudden, we're asking leaders to do more again on top of that, on top of what they're doing. Whereas realistically, asking them to, I think it was Joanna said there, I've not heard it before, facilitate excellence in others. What an amazing job description to do. But whilst you're signing off timesheets, doing expenses, reporting back upside, writing reports for other people to prove what's gone on, it's a tough gig. And I think it's about the organisation trying to create that space. Our biggest problem at the moment is cost of labour, and creating space is dead easier to run with a vacancy and kind of offload that work somewhere else than to create that space. So no massive insight at all, other than it's really difficult to try and get that balance.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Steve.
I was at an event yesterday, and there was an amazing speaker, and he talked about the 4-year-old daughter. This is the daughter that always asks why. Okay, why? They're intuitive, right? They're just why. They question everything, and when it comes down to Jonathan, I think the point, and I can't help you with this. This is not what I do, but something that I've seen an impact of. But when you have leaders, why are they doing what they're doing? Okay, what is their role? Why have you hired them? Okay, and what is it? What have you hired them to do? And is everything they're doing really needed? And when I say why, there's 3 whys. There's the why they're doing it, and then you go deeper. Okay, well, why that, and then why the, so get to the root source. And I'll give you an example, an illustration of what I mean. A company that I was speaking to, they're a foundation, and they are they're saving rhinos and across countries, and they were saying, well, the problem they have is poachers. But why are they poaching the rhino? Well, to get the cut, the hook, the whatever. And they said, well, why are they doing that? Well, they need the money. Ah, right. So what they've done is they've put honeybees onto the poaching lines. So rather than taking the rhino, take the honey, because they can make more money from the honey than they can from the rhino tusk, because there's so much of it. So by asking the whys, they've found a new solution. So again, when you're talking about leaders that are really busy, because you're right, leadership now is harder now than ever before. Anybody that tells you that leadership's easy, it's the hardest job in the world, because we're managing people, and every individual is unique and different. Okay, so finding a way of minimizing their workload so they can focus on why you employed them, I think is one of the things that we can absolutely do. And like I say, I don't have the solution for you. That's not what I do. But what I've seen in business where they've done that, and they've really challenged every aspect of what a leadership's doing, they're able to find shortcuts and wins and things, which means actually, well, why are we doing that? Is that just something that was installed for the sake of doing it 3 years ago, and it's a legacy thing that we're continuing doing? Or actually, can we shelve that? Or is there a more effective or efficient way of doing it? And you might find you're buying a huge amount of time back.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Jill says there's a process called the 7 whys to drill down to the real cause. And James says question storming is an effective way of getting down to the cause. So I'm going to move on to the next question, but while I do that, Joanna, do you want to jot down in the chat your 7 sourcing strategies? Because you did say them really quickly, and I think we all really wanted to hear what they were.
Can you type them as fast as you can say them, Joanna?
And moving on to this third question, let's talk about the gaps between employer expectations and new employee expectations, but this time with a focus on the education system. So how does the current education system serve the market that job seekers will be entering into in this new era of technologies and the focus on sustainable leadership? Vanessa, thank you.
Sorry, this one's a real bugbear of mine that I want to jump into, because we tend to talk a lot about the education system and this new era of technologies and sustainable leadership. But every time we talk about the education system, we're talking about young people. There are an awful lot of people in the middle of their careers who, with a little bit of education that's very hard to access, could actually step up in the new technologies that we're needing. You see a lot of this in STEM, right? Everybody talks about, oh, we need to get girls into STEM. Oh, but there's no girls in STEM because there are no female role models in STEM because there are no, okay, so there's a few companies who've said, well, why don't we take some women with excellent management skills, and this is coming on to kind of, you know, aptitude and mindset versus skill, make them managers of STEM teams, and suddenly you have female role models. You can teach them a bit about STEM. You can bring them up enough to speed to manage those teams. And so I think it's really short-sighted when we talk about education of people that we're mostly just talking about young people. I mean, they need education, but so do all the other people who are getting left behind because there's no chance for them to kind of change their skills to skills that didn't exist when they were young people.
Very good point. Joanna, do you want to jump in here?
I think sometimes when I see the question about gap between school output and business, I interpret the question as somehow the school is failing to deliver what business requires. And actually, I have a different point of view. From my experience, the way that we do our teaching now is much more coaching focused, growth mindset, Carol Dweck and all that kind of stuff. But in my experience in businesses, we're still quite a command and control leadership style. So for me, the gap is not whether what we're producing in schools is good enough. It's actually, is business ready for actually what is a much better way of doing business? Have you changed your leadership style to accommodate the learning style of the people that are being produced from the academic, you know, the institutions and things like that? So the key thing for me is we're looking in the wrong place for the challenge. We think somehow there's a problem with the school output. And in my view, there's a problem with the businesses expecting the school output to just shoehorn in to what is quite an old way of doing business.
So what we do agree on is there is a massive gap basically in what's
Yes.
being produced and what's expected on the other end. Jane,
Yes.
do you want to, fantastic. Jane, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Gimmo. And I absolutely agree with you, Johanna. I think there's a huge gap in our expectations, and it comes from, we expect people to come to us to want to do a job and stay with us. And what happens is we're getting kids from school who are more interested in learning, and they're moving on very quickly. So they come to us, they want a portfolio career, they want to learn something. They're taught at school to cross-pollinate and learn from each other. And as soon as we bring them into the workplace now, we're stopping that. No, you're in this team now, you're ours. End of story. And we're not encouraging it enough. And so what happens is that team looks more exciting. I'll go and work over there. And if that means leaving the company to do it, I will. And so we're not actually accommodating the expectations of the children, how they're being taught, which is actually, as Joanna said, you know, very modern too. We're not accommodating their value beliefs that you need to be more rounded before you settle on your career and what it might look like in the long term.
Great point. Go ahead, Steve.
I think this falls down, again, the example I always give is I look at my father. Okay, so at the age of 16, he got an apprentice and then he retired at 65 from the same organisation. He worked through and he was trained, he became a manager, then a leader, then a director, and he was one away from the owner when he retired. And he always talks about, he says, Steve, he said, I hated every day of my working life. He said it was miserable, but I had, in his mindset, there was no choice because that's what it was. You were lucky to get the apprentice, you got a skilled job and you worked your way through the steps. The difference, I'm not sure the education is where the difference is. I think the difference is that we're in a different world now. You know, I look at my kids, everything's instant. And they want it instantly. They're not looking for the next thing. That, you know, I remember, I mean, I'm huge into, I'm a 90s throwback. So, you know, music in the 90s. I remember when bands were about to release an album. So you get excited for 3 months waiting for the release, and then you queue up outside the record shop, and then you go in and you'd buy this physical, you know, record, and you get really excited and you go, well, now it's kind of, we're going to release a track, and then you go on your phone, it's there, it's you own it. It's immediate. And the difference now is that when an employee joins a business on a Monday, it's almost like they're expecting to be CEO by the Wednesday. So their path, and if they're not getting that level of growth, or they're not seeing that their career is progressing quickly enough, because they're always now taught to go and say, well, what else is better? What else is out there? And not only that, but we're being poached. We've got recruitment firms, we've got Glassdoor, we've got all these things fighting against employers because employees are constantly being attracted. It's like a sweet shop for them. So one of the things that I want to talk about solutions, because one of the things that, and I'm stealing this from a client, they are an organization that's been around for a long time. And what they did to react to this, and I thought this was really clever, they were, for example, if you had a 5-stage growth in your career, they broke each of those stages into 10 stages. So it meant that actually they're not changing the role, but they're just built. So every time they got a certificate and they got something physical. So it felt like I'm progressing. Look, and they're celebrating. Actually, nothing's, they're just celebrating each step of their journey, and their retention numbers were significantly greater as a result of that action. So again, one of the things I think we talk about this gap. I can't talk about the education. It's not where I'm skilled. I can't talk about but I think that the gap is around, again, comes back to mindset. We've got a young generation that have a very different mindset in the main. And we just need to, I think as businesses, we need to look at that and react. Otherwise we get left behind. The new shiny product will win.
Great. Jonathan, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, and again, it's handy being later in the conversation, listening to other people. I guess we've just completed our engagement survey, first one that we've done, and our most disengaged employee band is that kind of millennial, not even millennial, early starters, really, from anywhere from 21 up to about 26. I think the band they're the most disengaged. The interesting bit for me is they're also probably the most voice for us to tell you what they're disengaged about. And obviously going back to one of the first questions around the expectation between employment and employers, we the EVP, we talk about our values, we talk about our behaviors that we want, etc. And then when they turn up and they don't experience that, because they're often lower down in the business, and they're with less skilled leaders, managers, etc., and they don't experience the better together or brave and creative kind of side of things that we install at recruitment. And I read an article, not even an article, a post on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago that was just hilarious. It was a great example of this. Someone far younger than me had posted that their employer had failed their probation with them. So they decided to leave because the employer hadn't matched up to the expectation that they'd created. So this guy just went, I'm going to leave. And then he posted about it on LinkedIn. It got like thousands and thousands of comments. And the first thing is like, what organization is it? And it was in there, you can find it. And there was lots of people at my age commenting like, I can't believe the audacity of the person to do this. And there's lots of younger people commenting like, well, that's what they said, and they didn't match it. So I think again, it's all the way through this is this: what are you selling, and are you actually kind of matching what you're selling? The other bit for me, we've got a couple of guys in my team that are very young compared to me, and all they want to do is learn. All they want to do is have new experiences. All they want to do is not necessarily courses, but they want to feel that they're adding, etc. from that. And once you can allow them to feel that they're doing that and work with more experienced person and make that part of their journey, it seems to, that retention seems to be a lot easier. Now, at some point, they're going to go and cash that experience in and earn more money somewhere else. But it's hopefully, again, back to Raymond Blanc, if you've got a reputation for developing those people, it makes finding the other person's a bit easier as well.
Absolutely. So therefore, are there opportunities for employers to form links with job seekers through schools, and what might that look like? Go ahead, Joanna.
So I didn't say this in my introduction, but I'm ex-Royal Navy, and they have something which they call seed corn, which is basically, particularly for a Navy, which, if we're doing our job right, you should never see us. So how do you generate interest in a sector or a job that nobody sees? And the way that they do it is they go into schools. They run events where they literally take a couple of folks in uniform, somebody more senior, somebody more junior, closer to the school's age, and they go and introduce them. They go and offer up the career in terms of the insights, what it can be, what it can't be. Clearly, to your point, Jonathan, not overselling it. You will spend a lot of time away from home. That's the nature of the Navy. But at the same time, not underselling the development opportunities, which are very much apparent in the Royal Navy. So I think there's something for me about, it's a very intentional thing to do, which is we want to generate interest in our sector, our career, our company from a young age. Let's go into schools and do some job fairs or some show and tells, all that kind of stuff. And they've been doing that for as long as I was in the Navy. So 1992, certainly onwards, they've been engaging with schools.
Amazing. Yes, Jane.
So I've got a client who's in Mid Wales. They're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it takes hours to get to them from anywhere, but they're right next to a village. So they have a trapped employment market. But they still weren't getting people from the village to work for them. The way that they dealt with it was to go into the schools at every level and start working with the kids. Science projects, engineering projects, anything that they could think of project-wise to give the kids things to work on that were aimed at developing the skills that they would need as an employer. I mean, it was a really clever approach to ensure that they got that kind of succession planning in place almost. They knew that that 15-year-old girl was going to be the next best engineer they had by the time she was 15, because she'd already been through all of the processes.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was brilliant to watch. Absolutely brilliant.
Great. Vanessa, would you like to add to that? Before you answer, so you did bring up the point about us focusing on young people. So perhaps from a perspective of not just schools in terms of the young people, but anyone, say mature learners who go back into education, to an education system to upskill themselves. So what might that look like from your point of view?
So I'm going to draw on two things. I've been drawn being an American, which people may have picked up on. One of the things that happened in America, and it still surprises me that this doesn't happen in the same way here, it is all around scholarships. Most businesses in America endow scholarships, and they engage with the schools, and they put competitions together, and they will give you money to pay your tuition at university. And it's not tied up to you have to go and work here. But it's a really great way to get people kind of engaged and aware of the business. It still surprises me, particularly now that we have to pay so much tuition in this country, why companies haven't kind of picked up on that, because that's really a simple one. And I guess the other piece around how to give some of that know-how to people who are more experienced, and to give them that education. There's a training piece, but there's also something I've been working with clients on, which is around reverse mentoring. So you're bringing young people into the business, you get them working with someone who has a different commercial business skill set, but they can share their digital skills, their this is how kind of the world works, that sort of thing. So yeah, I suppose that's a really good approach that I've seen, but also just letting your employees step out of the business if they need specific technical education. STEM's a good example. Sponsor that for them. Send them to school to learn. I mean, you can do open university, you can do sort of anything. Picking up these new skills. Train them.
Great, thanks, Vanessa. Steve.
Yeah, I haven't really got a huge amount to add in terms of this subject, but I think it all comes down to your brand. And if you are a local business and you live and breathe your values, I know we're talking about ideal worlds here, Jonathan, and I know that in a reality things are very different, but there is, I'm very confident that if you rang any member of our team at Engagement Multiplier and asked what's the purpose and values of our business, they'd be able to tell you. And even if you didn't ask them, they'd be living and breathing it. And it's something that we install in our people, which is something that we fundamentally believe in. But the same time, I think within, if we're in a local area and we have a local school, we have an opportunity And I think what the Navy are doing is they're building the brand. When you see the adverts, they don't talk about, you know, the really hard end of it. They're talking about, right, this is an opportunity to get upskilled. They talk about, if you look at the adverts that go on the television, it's all the things that we don't think about relative to the brands as the additional thing. So that's one thing we can do for, you know, ourselves. And, you know, like an engagement multiplier, we talk about, you know, when somebody comes for an interview, their role is probably the last thing we talk about. And even before we get on to wages and role and responsibilities, I promise you they want to work with us, because we, you know, it's a great thing to be part of. So I think, you know, a lot of this just comes back down to your brand. How are you being perceived by the outside world? And actually, are we, and you've got to be living and breathing it. It's not about, like we said, we don't want to be setting expectations for things that aren't true, but actually, can we, you know, again, promote, you know, something which they wouldn't realize, or do they just see you as a distillery, or actually are we more than that? And I imagine there's more that sits behind than just a distillery, Jonathan, in your business as the example.
Did you want to go ahead, Jane, before we come to Jonathan?
Jonathan, go first, and then I'll.
Just two things. To come back on you, Steve, and would love some help. I've been in FMCG now for longer than I care to remember, and in the last 3 organisations have wrestled with the purpose of an organisation that is set out to make something and sell it for more expensive than you can make it, and find a higher purpose beyond making money or doing that, and being really honest, failed, and a huge advocate of the purpose statement, etc. And I can understand in different industries how it's easier to come up with that. Just to go back to the original question, I went to my son's careers afternoon last week at school, and the one thing that I had no clue about at all, which speaks to your point, Vanessa, is the new thing about degree apprenticeships, which was, you know, my son, he's 15, he's going to go on and do some A-levels after he's finished his GCSEs. And the thought of him going to university to do 7 or 8 hours of lectures a week and, you know, entertain himself on YouTube and the PlayStation in the remaining sort of 38 hours sort of fills me with dread a little bit. But the opportunity for him to go and learn a vocation in something that he's interested in, with the school helping narrow his choices of what that vocation could be, and earn money while he's doing it, and come out with a degree, and probably be, you know, a good 3 years up on any persons that have been to a degree course by the time he's finished it. It was really entertaining. And as an employer, I was a little embarrassed that, like, flipping heck, I'd never heard of that, never explored it. The complexity around trying to spend our apprenticeship levy is ginormously difficult as well from there, which is another opportunity that we miss. But that whole degree apprenticeship piece was a real eye-opener, and would love to be, as an employer, perhaps possibly with a purpose, Steve, on this, is to kind of go, right, how do we provide that springboard for other people to come in and learn a trade, have them for 5 years, even if they leave at the end of that as well.
Brilliant. Go ahead, Jane.
I think I was going to kind of pose a question and answer a question in the same voice. And one of the things that I always worry about in this arena is we all know businesses are there to make money, and we all know that businesses are measured by their stakeholders, shareholders, and on their profitability. And often the difficulty we have is proving that the initiatives we have are actually delivering something of value to the business. And I guess the disconnect perhaps is not so much that we don't have the kids with the right skills, we don't have the adults learning the right skills, or it's maybe that we don't have the right process for measuring the impact of those skills and the skills changes on our businesses, and therefore being able to prove that actually all of this effort is worthwhile.
Yes, Steve.
I've got to respond to that. I mean, we're obviously, we're all about measurement. It's all about data, and all too often, and I'll connect it to a conversation I had this morning. It'd be unfair of me to tell you who it was. They're not going to be a client of ours because we're not right for them, and you know, but you know, they were talking about all the things they're investing in, and some of it great. And I said to them, well, how do we know? So what information do you have to understand and know that you're investing in the right areas? Secondly, how are you going to measure the impact of what you're doing? Now, some of the stuff that they're investing in is six-figure stuff. So this is, if I was looking to invest six figures in anything, I'd want to know and have absolute clarity that I'm investing in the right areas and that it's going to have an impact. So going back to Jane, I think, yeah, and John.
I think Steve is having connectivity issues. Okay, so I'm just going to sneak in, if I can, a question that's just come up from Jill on the side panel here. How much do the panel think green values affect the job seekers and their choices? Go ahead, Jane.
I was reading an article the other day that said something like 70% of young adults now are checking the values of the organisations before they put in their applications for the job. So I think they're huge. And I just done an engagement piece for a client where we're looking at how much does it, what staff want in terms of benefits. And in all of the list of benefits, the biggest thing was the green benefits. Yeah. Things like that are good for the environment, and it's huge now, and I don't think that we maybe give enough thought to it.
What do you think, Vanessa?
Well, I was just going to ask a question, because this is something that I think about quite a lot personally, but I wonder as well how much people are thinking about green values, green benefits, and to what extent they're worrying then about congruence. You know, is it important to you that your car fleet is, say, electric vehicles, if you believe that's a good green benefit? Does it then matter if you're an industry that is, say, producing fruit salad in single-use plastics? Does it matter? Do you care? So I was just curious, is it headline green values or is it genuine green values? You know, does that congruence matter, and do people care?
Would you like to respond to that, Joanna?
I do some work on a national program, the Help to Grow program. And when I listen to small businesses talk, sometimes they feel like some of the things we're talking about are a luxury. You know, you can do that if you're very profitable. You can do that if, for example, you're not running an FMCG, you know, with markets changing all the time. And for me, therefore, if you think that all this stuff is a luxury, the likelihood is you're not taking it as seriously as you might, and therefore you might be seeing some talent behavior accordingly. From my experience talking to employees, that stuff does matter. You know, stupidly, you don't join the armed forces if you're worried about killing people, for example, because even if you're not necessarily on the sharp end of a sword, the likelihood is that you are part of an organization of which there is a sharp end at some point, even if it is quite distance from you. So I do think, you know, one of the things that the armed forces were definitely worrying about is, because young people are so purpose-led, how do you keep them interested in the armed forces? How do you help them understand that the purpose of killing people can still be noble, as well as saving the planet, for example?
What do you think, Jonathan?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I would say we are doing an awful lot on sustainability. You know, we produce an awful lot of, we buy a lot of glass, we produce a lot of cardboard, we produce a lot of plastic, and you know, there's all sorts of, I guess we're being, some might say, encouraged by the large supermarkets, some might say forced to be far greener in the way in which we're, when we get audited as well, which has that secondary benefit of then being able to say, oh, we're carbon neutral, or, you know, there's massive benefits financially for us as well. We've just completely rewired the whole of the factory in Warrington with LED lighting, and it pays itself back in a year, and our fuel bills from that are significantly less. There's not so much congruence with certain suppliers not taking cardboard, certain suppliers not taking plastics, and if we could get much more alignment on that, it would be easier as a manufacturer to be consistent. I guess from a recruitment perspective, we don't see a lot of that, if I'm being really honest. But again, that might be because I'm a certain age and not paying a lot of attention to it. We might be alienating ourselves from a certain type of recruit from there as well. It is important. It's becoming more important. We have initiatives through the business and sustainability because it's the right thing to do. But I don't think we talk about it as much as we possibly could do to attract some of those recruits.
Thanks for that perspective. Jane.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Jonathan, but you mentioned earlier that you've got an engagement survey. Do you include in that survey questions about opinions on?
Yeah, so there was one or two questions which test me out. Speaks to quintessential brands allows me to contribute to society, and it's very easy to lump that in with like, well, we'll give everyone a charity day or everyone gets to do this. The reality of the question was it created more confusion than clarity. So it doesn't talk about sustainability, it just talks about kind of contribution. Again, next year, when we do it again, we can alter that, but it was the most misunderstood question that we had in the entire survey, really. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so what role does the panel think that employers can play to try and reduce the skills gap? So the skills gap, I mean, as we've discussed today, is quite broad. We're talking about, literal competencies, but we're also talking about mindset gaps. We're talking about, the green values gaps, perhaps that particularly are widening things like the digital divide. That's one of the big topics that are, that we see in conversation amongst businesses. So basically, what role can employers play? Is there something we can do across the spectrum, or is it context specific? What are your views? Go ahead, Jane.
I'll hazard an instant answer and say I think awareness of our of the entity as an entity. So quintessential as an entity in itself, a self-awareness about what that entity means, but also ensuring that individuals are aware of what it means. I think it's just being more communicative. I think it's really difficult in an environment to get up and say this is who we are and what we do, and be really clear about what that means. But more talk generates better understanding.
Right. Okay. Great. Joanna, what do you think?
So I was coaching an individual yesterday who is having a massive problem recruiting 2 particular posts in their business, and has been struggling for a year. And what we did in our time together was kind of think superlaterally about how they might deliver the outcome, but with a very different input. And one of the things that I noticed was actually this business owner was their own worst enemy. Their mindset was very fixed on, I get somebody in. So for example, the difference between FTE and headcount, for example, that it hadn't even occurred to them that you could distinguish between the two things. Their mind that said, I have to have people in the office that start at 8 and finish at 6. And again, I was being super mischievous and challenging that. So the key thing for me is, can we get employers to open their minds about how capability is delivered, when, how, by whom, in what state? Because for me, at the moment, I speak to too many business owners for whom the idea that you might have somebody coming in between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, or working remotely, or not coming in at all, just blows their mind.
Vanessa, you're nodding. Go ahead.
No, I think I was just agreeing with that helping employers take that perspective that you can solve your problem differently to the way that you've always solved it is a really important one. And I think at the same time, employers can also help teach that skill, bring that as a skill to their employees, that let's look at something from a different perspective. Let's look at, well, how might we achieve this? It was always some of the most fruitful conversations I have, and I'm going to use database building, because I would kind of say, well, I'd like this to happen, and the guys would say, well, this is how it works. Okay, well, how it works, how can that give me what I'm looking for? And we generally get there, but it didn't occur to them to think about, well, we could use it a little bit differently. So that's a skill that I think everyone could do with learning, both employers and employees.
So we're talking about reskilling all the way from right at the top, all the way through the organization.
Absolutely. That looking at things differently is just something that I think everyone needs a constant refresher on.
Yeah, agreed. Jane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I work with some employment lawyers, and they were struggling to get enough lawyers. And one of the issues was that they just wanted these lawyers to all be 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. And I was like, well, why can't the job share? And there was this kind of awful silence, and the look they gave me, what, you mean 2 lawyers working with the same client? And I said, yeah. And they were like, well, how would they know what one had said and what the other one had said? Well, in the same way that when you're calling a call center, they call up your record and say, I see you've had a discussion with X about this. So you could be using the same technology. And there was this kind of stunned silence. And then about 6 weeks later, we've had this really great idea and we brought in some technology from a call center that we can use. And I was like, oh, great, fantastic, well done. But but that kind of pushing back and saying, why can't you do it? You're putting barriers in the way that don't exist when there's that much technology out there now to solve some of these problems. And it really did cause them to go away and do something differently, and it's working.
Interesting. Jonathan.
Yeah, it's that paradigm shift, isn't it, of doing things differently that unfortunately we seem to be rewinding back from the all this work from home piece at a rapid rate, and again our business is wrestling with a desire to bring people back in the office from 9 till 5 because then they will work harder and smarter, etc., which is not necessarily the case. I think it speaks again to that leadership piece around, if you manage presenteeism and you equate that to work, then that's a very old adage, as opposed to managing outcome and output, which is far harder and needs more kind of clarity for someone in terms of what they're working on. Is tough. So yeah, we've certainly not got the outcome that I was looking for from the post-pandemic kind of working. We are trying to bring people back in 3 days a week. The other bit, just to speak about the skills gap, on our engagement survey that I've spoken so much about today, one of the big surprising things that came out was people want to develop, which shouldn't be so surprising. They just want people to or individuals saying, I need to feel like I'm developing. We don't have massive training budgets, and something we're dipping our toe in the water at the moment. We've just bought 50 licenses from LinkedIn Learning, and the idea would be to allow those people to have some self-directed learning opportunities in whatever topic that they want. And you can do on LinkedIn Learning, there's from beekeeping right the way through to having a difficult conversation just before you do appraisal, etc. And the idea of the whole piece, whether it's successful or not, is to allow those licenses to go into the business and allow those people to really just see, well, if I take half an hour before I'm going to go and do something new or refresh, etc., from that, and see how that impacts people's learning from that. For me, a bit of an advocate, I don't really care what they're learning about as long as they're learning something that keeps the brain kind of really fresh and engaged. But if they're actually kind of blending that learning with skills that are good for the company as well, then that's all much better. Now, it could fall flat on its face and not be used, or it could be a big piece for us. I don't know.
Interesting. Go ahead, Vanessa. You have a comment?
I was just going to follow on from that. That's something I'm seeing more and more companies start to introduce is almost a lifelong learning permission. I've seen people introducing sort of a learning allowance. So you have X amount every year. You can spend that on whatever you want. You can learn beekeeping. You can learn sort of anything. And that's something that employees are really valuing. And it's because looking at something completely different just gives you that different perspective. I mean, it's something I do personally. Every year, I always make a point of learning a new skill that has nothing to do with my job. And by the end of picking up that new skill, I can almost always relate it to my job.
Absolutely. Did you have anything else to add, Joanna?
One of the things that I experience is many organizations spend far more money on stuff than they do their people. And interestingly, the return on investment, and I don't have the exact figures, but let's say you spent £1 on equipment, you might get £1 back. If you spent £1 on people, invariably you get 10 times that back because of that discretionary effort, because of that engagement, because of the creativity and the ideation. And one of the things I really spot, and I noticed this so much in the small business world, they're saying they can't afford learning and development while they spend shed loads of cash on stuff which won't generate anywhere near the same level of return on investment. And recently when I was doing a module on this, you know, they kind of look at me like I'm talking nuts. What, people? We get more return on investment on people? Yeah, give it a go.
Interesting. Interesting. And that brings us to our final question. So how can we support young people to be best prepared for the fast changing world of work, whether as employees or indeed to become the employer of the future? Jane, would you like to kickstart that one for us?
Give them space.
Yeah.
Give them space to learn to be who they are and allow them to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's it right from this. That's my whole belief. It doesn't matter what you can't do, it matters what you can do.
I like that. Jonathan?
Yeah, as a father of a 15-year-old who's kind of obviously a good few years off work now, we do talk to him a lot about some of the choices he makes in relation to work, in terms of, you know, when I think of what I would want for him from an employer perspective, I'd want his individual thinking. I'd like him to be independent in thought. I'd like, you know, there's no substitute for working hard and really kind of really putting his nose to the grindstone and working hard really for that. And I do find, and it was talked about earlier, there is sometimes a sense of entitlement for people coming into the workforce that it's going to be easy, and it's not. It's bloody difficult sometimes. It just takes perseverance. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Vanessa, what would you like to add to that?
Don't know that there's an awful lot I can add except my agreement. Yeah.
Okay, great. Joanna?
So just to build on Jonathan's point, I think one of the things that we haven't equipped young people to do very well is to negotiate or co-create. So we start off in an adversarial position. Employer wants this, employee wants that. Oh, well, it's not going to happen. Boom, we're done. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can equip the employee to negotiate what it is that they want, but recognizing that they won't necessarily get all they want. When it comes to the employer, fix the leader, not the gap, is what I want to suggest. So I think rather than focusing on the gap, could we address some of those things that we've been talking about today? So what is your leadership style? To what extent are you living and breathing and exhibiting the values of your organization that are important to you? Do you know that there's a clear line of sight between your leadership style and the productivity and the profit of your organization? And if so, have you done anything about that? And then lastly, have you done your investment accordingly to really fix what will make the most difference, which is probably the leadership tone and style of your organization, not necessarily the skills gap. So start perhaps slightly further up the value chain than we might be considering at the moment.
That's really good. Just to pick up on your co-creation comments, that's actually genius, because I think, as we've talked about and as we've heard throughout this conversation, employers will come with I'm going to call it a fixed mindset of what they want and who they want in terms of what they believe fits with their current model. But how many are actually challenging whether there's other ways and other perspectives in order to get the same thing done and achieved? And this co-creation space, a young person coming in and sort of saying, well, have you actually considered, I mean, it's sort of co-creation / reverse mentorship, as we mentioned before. Have you considered this? Well, I have this great idea, and I think your company would be, you know, a great place to experiment with this sort of thing, because I believe these are the kind of outputs that may come out of this. Are you open to looking into this with me, you know? And I think that would be, that's brilliant. But you're right. Are young people brave enough, first of all, to make that level of suggestion? I was speaking to the Cheltenham Education Partnership recently, who works with 11 schools at the University of Gloucestershire and one other university. It escapes my mind at the moment. And they are prepping young children from year 10, 11, 12 to debate with business leaders on the issues that they feel most important to them. And when I heard this, I was like, wow. those young people are going to be fantastic leaders, but they've been given that stage and that platform and that, you know, capability to do that. So maybe this is about forming those partnerships, not just putting the pressure on what can businesses do for these young people, but how can businesses work together with some of these councils and some of these organizations that are invested in equipping and empowering these young people to sort of get the best out of them and the best for the business, the best for the young person, the best for the community as a whole. That's just my 5 pence. Brilliant. Is there any other comment on what we've discussed so far? I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation. Great. No, thank you so much. I cannot see who's in the audience, but if there are any audience questions at all, Jill, can you see anyone at the moment? Nope, that's okay. That's fine. So there won't be any questions coming through. Steve did offer to circulate his white paper, so I'll make sure that gets out to everyone. It'll be quite an interesting read, I believe. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jane, Joanna, Vanessa, Jonathan, and Steve, of course, for joining me today and for a really lively and engaging conversation. Lots of things to kind of take away and mull over, I think, and I'm sure you all feel the same.